My name is David Ulbrich, and this is September 6, 2007. What is your full name, sir?
Carl B. Yerian.
And when and where were you born?
I was born in Washington Courthouse, Ohio, February 25th, 1922,
And which squadron were you in?
514.
A little bit about the period of time in your life before you joined the military. What was life like in the Great Depression and then once the war started?
Well, I grew up, of course, during the Great Depression. My father was a sharecrop farmer. The Depression didn't bother us too much because we didn't have anything to lose, and we lived on a farm where we had food, so we got through that fairly well. And then after I graduated from high school, I went to work for the Bell Telephone Company before Pearl Harbor. So,
What were your memories of Pearl Harbor, the attack? What were you doing? Do you remember what you were doing when you heard about it or how you reacted?
yes, I did. I was a telephone cable splicer. I was working at a manhole in Columbus, and I went to lunch and heard about it, and it was pretty shocking.
When did you end up joining the military? Were you drafted or did you volunteer?
I went downtown Columbus, Ohio, to register for the draft. Then I immediately went across the street and enlisted as an aviation cadet in the Enlisted Reserve Corps, 5th of August, 1942.
And why did you, was there a particular reason why you wanted to go ahead and enlist?
Yeah, I didn't want to be drafted into the Army. I wanted to fly, so I enlisted as an aviation cadet.
And tell me more about what your training was like. Where were you and how did that work?
Well, after I enlisted, I, of course, took a physical, and then I was told to wait till I was called. In the meantime, I was transferred from Columbus to Dayton, Ohio, in my job, enrolled in school for some higher math classes. And then February 44, I was ordered to Nashville, Tennessee, to a classification center. We were put in a tar paper barracks that was very cold and with no heat. We'd pour water on the floor to mop the floor, and it'd freeze before you could mop it up. You hang a towel on the end of your bed at night, and it'd be stiff in the morning. There was quite a bit of sickness, but that's where we were classified as a navigator, bombardier, or pilot, and I was classified as a pilot. I went to pre-flight training at Maxwell Field, Montgomery, Alabama. Took all my pilot training in Southeast. Flew Stearman with a civilian contract in Union City, Tennessee from primary, and Malden, Missouri for basic, and then advanced twin engine in Blytheville, Arkansas. I graduated from Blytheville, Arkansas as a second lieutenant with my pilot wings on the 3rd of November, 1943.
During your training, did you have any close calls, or did you know of people or other pilots who had accidents? It seems the training was kind of dangerous at times.
It was. I really had none. It was fairly routine, and I had no close calls that I can recall.
I'd read one book. Actually, this was the book on by Stephen Ambrose on George McGovern's outfit. And in that book, Ambrose writes, or maybe it was McGovern that said that flying the B-24 was like driving a Mack truck. Is that how do you react to that?
Well, I read that book. Of course, McGovern was there a little bit after I was and had a little bit different environment. But yeah, the B-24 was somewhat like a Mack truck. Yes, it was. One of the big things, the heaters didn't work, and we were flying at high altitude. It was very cold, and we flew in very tight formation all the time. So it was okay. Maybe Mack truck.
Well, the engines were very powerful, and in terms of flying, was it responsive to flying?
Yes.
I guess compared, I guess another way to look at it is how would it have compared with flying, say, the B-17?
Oh, I flew both. There's a lot of comparisons. You know, B-24 and B-17 pilots have always had a ongoing discussion about the merits. But after I've completed my missions, I trained and cruised in B-29s, and then I flew B-17s for a navigation mission. So I flew both. And of course, the B-24 had a heavier bomb load and a little longer range than the B-17. But to see if B-17 got all the publicity because the 8th Air Force got all the PR, and then of course they flew the B-17 on the bond drives in the country. So all you see is a B-17 and the PR. B-24 really didn't get very much publicity.
As I understand, there were, I think, 3 times as many B-24s manufactured as B-17s.
Right.
But as you said, the Hollywood Air Force.
Right.
The Hollywood Air Force got all the PR, all the publicity. Could you run through, to the best of your memory, what the process of readying your ship for flight was? Kind of give me a bit of a checklist of what the types of things you would do.
Okay. Yeah, it was fairly routine. At the time I was over there in 44, of course, the 376 had lost a lot of people in the Ploesti raid. The Vicenza, December 28th mission, Vicenza, the 512th was almost wiped out. There was a little bit of shortage of crews, and we were flying almost every day. But the normal thing is you get up at 4 o'clock in the morning, the officers, you go to chow, and the officers went to the briefing, and the airmen were out getting the airplane ready, the armament people loading the armament, the bombs getting loaded, and the gas getting refueled or getting fueled. And a lot of the ground crew, there's one here, that don't feel that they're heroes because they didn't fly. Well, they were the real heroes. I tell you, we could not have operated without those ground crews taking care of the airplane. And these guys had been in North Africa maintaining these things in sandstorms, and they really knew their stuff. And we brought back airplanes every day full of holes, with Bombay doors torn off, something wrong with the engine. If we had a day off, the crew chief would fly. It wasn't on flying pay. They'd go out and fly with us, make sure that every instrument was exactly perfect. They deserve all the praise they can get, because we never worried about, generally, losing an engine. We did lose some, but the maintenance was terrific. When I came back, training crews in B-24s, we never expected to take off, come back with 4 engines running. Over there, that wasn't a problem.
So all right. So you've gotten the great maintenance work. Your ship's ready to fly. What's the sort of checklist that you go through as did you walk around the aircraft as the pilot to do like kind of a line of sight thing?
You always do a walk around to make sure that everything is all the ailerons and the rudder and everything works, that there's no gas leaks and the tires are inflated, and it's just a walk around visual inspection, right?
Visual inspection, and then you'd climb into the aircraft, and
well, then you have a written checklist that you can go through.
Would you be working with the co-pilot and then working with the different crew members to kind of make sure that all their equipment worked?
Each one had their own, and you work as a crew, a 10-man crew, and everybody has their, and you fly together every day. You sort of become like family, because you depend on every one of them doing their job for survival. And if one weak link, you got a problem. So each one checks, the gunners check their guns, the radio operator checks the radio, the bombardier checks his bomb sight, and the navigator's got the flight plan worked out. And so everybody has to do their job.
Sure. In terms of being a pilot, and this would, I guess, go for being a co-pilot also, what were your biggest challenges once you got into the air? Was it flying formation, or what was the biggest challenge?
Well, actually, we flew very close formation for protection. Of course, the formation was V's, A flight, V's in trail, B flights up above, V's in trail, C flights down below. So the 10 machine guns on each one of these airplanes had access to any fighters coming in from any direction. So you had to fly very close formation, using breathing oxygen every time you blew above 10,000 feet. And it was very cold, and the heaters didn't work, and your hands would freeze, and when you start to let down, your hands start to hurt so bad you can't hardly stand it. So, of course, most of the challenges were the flak over the target and the enemy fighters coming at you.
Sure. So you were saying you'd have a six plane box. Was that
Yeah.
just saying with two?
Yeah, the A flight was a 6-plane, and sometimes more, but that's a standard formation. With a 6-plane box was A flight, 6 up here is a B flight, and a C flight down below is 6 V's in trail.
And that's designed to concentrate your combined firepower against enemy aircraft.
Right.
Within that flight formation, what was the toughest place to fly? What was the toughest position to fly? Or were they all tough?
They were all pretty tough. And sometimes you'd have a fourth one on the back with tail end Charlie, which wasn't necessarily the toughest, but the fighters could get at it a little easier. But I've flown practically all those positions, and they're all about the same.
What would happen? What would be your initial reaction, or what would happen if one of your engines malfunctioned or got shot up or caught fire? What was your procedure to deal with that?
Well, I can tell you a couple of cases where that we were on a mission, let me tell you, to Wiener Neustadt, an airplane factory. 376 was leading the wing, the 4 groups in the wing. We were flying an old D model, which was the old planes that were flown in the desert. They just had a single fixed 50 caliber in the nose. The later ones had a turret with twin 50. We lost number 3 engine on the way to target with a heavy bomb load. We thought, well, we'd hold.
Is number 3 the outboard engine?
It's the third. On your right-hand side, it's the one next to the.
All right. So
they start with 1 on the left, 2, then 3 and 4.
All right. Very good.
So the number 3 engine, we lost it and we couldn't feather the prop, and that creates a lot of additional drag. We dropped back into the second group. We finally dropped back to the third group, and we finally dropped the bombs with the fourth group back. And then when they left the target, there were, according to the mission report, there were 45 enemy aircraft. When they left, everybody left. We were sitting there with 3 engines by ourselves.
So you were a straggler at that point.
Yeah. And I was looking out the window of this fighter coming in. I could see the fire coming out the end of his gun. And all of a sudden, he took off, and I looked up, and there was a P-38 came over. The most beautiful airplane I've ever seen in my life. But anyway, they run them off, and we started letting down. We got the engine feathered, and on 3 engines, we finally caught up with our formation. And on 3 engines, to get back.
Wow, you must have really been moving to do that. You must have really been pushing it. Did you often have fighter cover, say P-38s, or maybe the P-51s with the Tuskegee Airmen? Did you ever?
We had the Tuskegee Airmen. They had P-47s at the time I was there.
All right.
But their range was limited. They'd come with us as far as they could go. We usually go with the target by ourselves, and then they'd meet us on the way back. They finally later got P-51s, which they had more range, and they could go pretty much all the way to target with us. But they were excellent, the Tuskegee Airmen.
So everything we've seen on the television shows or whatever, they were efficient pilots, didn't lose any aircraft, and watched over you from above. I guess they would have been flying above you, correct?
They were. I came home on a ship with a bunch of them. They were really fine gentlemen. They were really nice people. But sort of comical to hear them sometimes. I heard one time, Red Dog 1, this Red Dog 2, I got MA 109 on my tail. And he said, Red Dog 2, you're coming in very poorly. I can't hear you. Anyway, yeah, they were great.
Excellent, excellent. Describe what it was like flying through flak. All right, the fighters would have, the German fighters would have left you alone over the target
Over the
because
target.
they had the German 88 shooting flak at you.
Right.
Describe can you think of a particularly rough mission with a lot of flak? All right.
Yes, I'm going to talk to you about that. That was over Swacket, Austria. Again, the 376 was leading the wing. The wing commander was flying with me as an observer. And over the target, we had a direct hit through the bomb bay, and the fuel system, the fuel tanks are in the wing, and there's a fuel transfer system under the wing, just above the bomb bay bulkhead. We got a hit in that fuel transfer system. The bomb bay filled up with gas. Gas came up in the cockpit, was everywhere around the rings in the turret. So we opened the bomb bay doors to let the gas out. And my flight engineer climbed up through the bomb bay, up under this wing. He couldn't wear a parachute. The bomb bay doors were open. It was 60 below zero. He's up there with these bare hands, and I was changing booster pumps, and he got in there and got the gas leak stopped. The wing commander was filling up portable oxygen bottles and handing up to him so he could have oxygen to work on. But he got it fixed and we got back. So both he and the wing commander got the Silver Star for that, which he deserved. I don't know about the wing commander, but the flight engineer, the hide all came off his hands and he was in the hospital, but he got us home.
Well, that's why you have the flight engineer, right?
Right.
To stand there right on the flight deck and fix things as they need to be fixed.
And he did that when he got us home.
Did you end up having to straggle to get home from that, or did you?
No, we stayed in formation for that.
So was your co-pilot basically flying the plane while you or were you pilot or co-pilot?
No, on that one I was co-pilot. The pilot was flying, and I was handling booster pumps and trying to get the leak stopped. So.
Was that your most frightening moment?
No.
No. What was your most frightening moment?
The most frightening moment was I was flying in the C section underneath the number 3 man, and I looked out and there was a German fighter coming into us, and the gunners were all zeroed in on him, and I watched his left wing disintegrate, and he crashed into the airplane that was right above me, and they both exploded. And flaming engines, some went over my wing, some went underneath, pieces of debris. And we saw no survivors, but there was one. The bombardier was blown out. He survived. In fact, he was at one of these reunions. And, but that was probably my most. I was trying to hide behind the control panel and watching stuff going over both under.
Do you think that your training back stateside, I mean, training is training, so it's not real combat, but do you feel like you were well prepared, as well prepared as you could be?
Yeah, I think so, because, well, I'll talk to where our training did pay off. The mission we talked about at Corsica. You know, instrument training was mostly in a link trainer simulated. We had maybe with a hood instrument training. But on that mission where I had a direct hit in the left wing and both engines out and couldn't windmill on, or couldn't feather on one side, I had to let down through an overcast with no gyro instruments, just needle ball and airspeed with 2 engines, and we had very little instrument training. But it was enough that I was able to make a descent on needle ball and airspeed with 2 engines windmilling through a complete overcast down and land in Corsica. So
Why don't you tell me more about that mission where you ended up on Corsica?
Well, that one, yeah, that was a mission on the Var River Bridge near Nice in southern France. According to our intelligence briefing, they only had 19 heavy guns. It was supposed to be an easy mission. And that may be, but one of those 19 guns had me in their sights with a direct hit in the left wing, which severed all the electrical wiring, cut the gas hose, and made me lose both engines on one side. But we landed in Corsica, and there was a B-24 that had crashed there before, so we cannibalized parts off of it, took the leading edge of the wing off. My experience as a telephone cable splicer came in. There was a bundle of wires about that big in the leading edge of the wing. I traced those all out and spliced them together. My crew went, one of the control cables was nicked, so we got a control cable, and it was a little bit long. We took it down to a French welding shop and had the turnbuckle shortened on it. And we worked day and night and put the airplane back together. And I flew it back at night, which nobody flew at night, and we hadn't flown at night forever. Our field was closed. San Pancrazio base was closed, so I had to go to a strange field. And that's the one where they considered court-martialing because for flying an unsafe airplane. But the maintenance officer went and checked it and said we did an absolutely fantastic job, so they gave me the DFC.
Was that was that the only decoration you received?
No, I had the Air Medal with 4 oak leaf clusters, and I had, of course, the European Theater with 5 battle stars. Plus, those were the main ones.
And how long were you on the island of Corsica trying to fix your aircraft?
We landed. We worked straight through 24 hours, and the following evening we had it done, and that's when we took off for home.
Now you said that your crew was a lot like a family. You trusted everybody to do that. That must have really been a big bonding experience, really drew you together really, really tight.
Right.
As here you were, you know.
Everybody worked, everybody pitched in. You know, this wasn't our job, putting airplanes together. That was the maintenance people, but
sure.
we did it.
Well, you did what you had to do.
Right.
And of course, in terms of the flight crew, you would have had your pilot, co-pilot as officers, the bombardier as an officer. Was the navigator an officer?
Yes.
And then I think the rest would be
for all airmen.
Sergeants usually, correct?
Yeah, right.
And so, but you know, you didn't. You had shown me pictures of that, and you would have been rolling up your sleeves, working right next to them, and they would have been rolling up their sleeves, working right next to you.
We all worked together, right.
I had read that one of the reasons why flight crews were promoted to sergeant at minimum is that if they were shot down and captured, the Germans would treat the sergeants better than the corporals or the privates.
So I think that's probably some true. I'm not sure, but that probably had some bearing. But a lot of it was due to their experience and qualifications.
What do you recall about your superior officers or the commanding officers? You said was it the wing commander flew as an observer with you?
Right.
Were there some stories that you recall about about your commanding officers?
Well, yeah, we had our squadron commander was on his second tour, and he had stayed a little bit too long because he got where. Well, we were losing a lot of people, and he'd be in a club at night and drawing coffins on the board, and he just overextended himself. But basically, I had no problem. We had and he was a good officer, but he was stressed out, I think.
And the foot soldiers call that the 1,000-yard stare.
Yeah.
Kind of just getting a sort of deer in the headlights kind of thing.
And part of that, too, another story, it was a friend of mine, we both decided that when we finished our 50 missions, we were going to stay over sign up for a tour of flying P-38s. So he finished his missions. I still had 5 to go. I flew him up to the P-38 base, and of course we usually gave him a buzz job, which we pretty good. It was nothing at San Pancracio to look up and see 4 props coming at you at ground level. But we buzzed that P-38 base pretty good, and then pulled up. All the brass were out there lined up. They thought that the Secretary of War was making a tour over or something or other. So I kicked his duffel bag out to Bombay and full throttle and forgot to put the flaps up and took off and left him. Well, anyway, I finished my last 5 missions were pretty rough. And by the time I'd finished mine, he'd already been killed. So I said, well, maybe if they want to send me home, I think maybe I'll just go. So that's why I didn't stay for my second tour.
In terms of, other than the target near Austria you were talking about, what were some of the other really tough targets?
Well, Ploesti, of course, was always a tough one. I think a day or two after that Var River Bridge mission, they sent the whole 15th Air Force over Ploesti. And you could see airplanes as far as you could see going in. You could see the flak, you could see planes blowing up and people bailing out, and you knew you're going into there, and you're just waiting your turn.
And the Germans would create, 2,000 by 2,000 foot boxes that you're just flying into. And from what I understand, you don't take evasive action. You just kind of...
You hear those 88s, there's usually in 4, boom, 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 and then it sounds like somebody's throwing gravel all over where the shrapnel's coming through the plane.
And then during the bomb runs, obviously as pilot or co-pilot, you would fly in. As pilot, you'd fly the plane, but then did you turn over some control of the plane to the bombardier?
Oh yes, on the bomb run, the bombardier is given control. He's got the Norton bomb sight. The lead bombardier takes a bomb sight, and he actually controls the plane up to the bomb release point. Everybody else drops on the lead. When the lead dropped, everybody else dropped on him. But
so the bombardier was kind of a 2-minute pilot.
Yeah, right.
2-minute pilot.
All right.
On a lighter note, what did you do for recreation or fun when you weren't flying? Maybe you had bad weather and you couldn't get up for a few days. What was the...
We had very few. I flew 51 missions in about, from April to July.
Wow.
So it was almost, we were flying sometimes 3 and 4 days in a row. Now, if we had a day off, we'd go fly locally. And we'd try to invite somebody from the Navy over to fly with us, because if they'd invite us over to the ship, they had steak and ice cream and all this stuff. We ate sea rations. So we'd take them a ride. Maybe they'd invite us over. But we would go up and fly and check, make sure everything on the airplane. And we'd buzz the countryside a little bit, try to upset sailboats and public relations.
What was, can you think of a amusing or funny episode that happened to you, or something about one of your buddies, one of your crew members? What's something that's amusing that you don't read about in the history books?
Well, I don't know of anything really.
Well, we'll come back to that. We'll come back to that.
Yeah, I've got right offhand, I can't.
We'll come back to that. This is one of the kind of a tough question. One of the things that there's that old adage: "There's no atheists in foxholes," and it's to what degree, if at all, if you did have some sort of religious faith, to what degree did your experience in combat affect that religious faith, if at all?
Well, I don't know if it affected. Of course, I was raised. My mother had me in church every Sunday from the time I was 2 years old. And I was brought up in the church, so I had a belief in God, and there's times when I had to depend on Him a bit, but I don't think it really affected me.
But your faith was there, though.
Yeah,
was
yeah.
there. Faith was there. All right. All right. When you when you were on the ground in between missions, what was discipline or regulations like at your Air Force base?
It was very loose. It was very loose. The only thing, one time I had a day off. I was buzzing a mess hall, and of course we had our communications I had a bunch of field wire strung across on a 2x4, and I got a little bit low and tore down the wires. The commander said, you know, you got to go put them back up before you can go to chow. So that was about the extent of the. It was kind of loose because, you know, everybody was buzzing in place.
And in the Army, they have a term for an officer that's just too rule happy. They call them chicken shit.
Oh yeah.
But you know, you would
We
from
didn't
everything
have
I've read
much.
about the Air Force, it was more relaxed because, well, you guys would be flying all day.
Right.
You know.
Yeah, we didn't have much of that. Stateside, maybe, but I mean during combat, it wouldn't.
What was your sleeping arrangements like? Did you sleep in a hut or a tent?
Tent. We had the 4 officers slept in one tent, and we took wood from bomb crates and built a wooden floor and built some wooden sides, and the 4 of us in there. And we had a 55-gallon drum cut off with sand put in it, and aviation gas dripped into it to burn for heat. And of course, every once in a while, somebody'd go to breakfast in the morning and forget to turn it off, and you'd see a big flash, and the tent went up. But that aviation gas dripping in there and burning that was our heat.
And I've seen photographs of southern Italy. It snowed and it looked like it was cold there in the winter. You think French Riviera, it's always warm, but it sounded like it was cold there at times.
And when I got over there in March of '44, they had a lot of rain and there was flooding on the base at San Pancrazio. And on our first missions for quite a while, the taxiways were bud with a full bomb load and a full gas load. The bomb bays would drag in the mud, and we'd have to taxi with full throttle. And when we get up to altitude, they'd freeze. And we go drop the bombs, and we'd drop them through the bomb bay and tear the bomb bay doors off. It was 60 below zero with not much heat, and come back with the bomb bay doors off every day. Next day they had new ones on. We go up and drop bombs through them again.
And of course the your fuselage, it's paper thin, really. It's you couldn't stand on the bomb bay doors. It can only handle about 100 pounds of weight.
Right.
It's gonna break open. Another kind of a tough question. Do you feel any sort of guilt or remorse about possibly killing German civilians? I mean, obviously, if you're hitting a factory, that's a strategic target, that's a logistics target. But looking back on it, is this?
Well, I'm sure that happened. Most of our targets were railroad marshaling yards or aircraft factories, and I'm sure there was cases where that. But I really didn't feel any remorse about that. I thought we were in war. We're doing what we're told to do, and that's the way it is.
And the RAF flying out of England was doing more of the night bombing, where they would be hitting in a square mile, have the fire set.
Yeah, we didn't really have much. Ours were all bridges or marshaling yards or aircraft factories, but any stray bombing was just errors in delivery.
In terms of letters from home, did you receive many letters from home, or did you write many letters?
Not many. I didn't have time.
Well, yeah, if you're flying, 50 missions, or
Yeah,
and really 3 or 4 months, it sounds like.
I had 51 missions from April to July.
So you didn't. You're right. You didn't have a whole lot of
We
time.
did have 2 weeks in Capri for R&R, but
What was that like?
well, it was not too touristy. It was sort of GI type thing, but at least you were away and you weren't flying missions. So It was relaxing.
I just have a couple more questions for you as we're running down here. This is a question I ask all veterans, whether it's airmen or sailors or Marines or soldiers. Do you consider yourself to be a quote-unquote hero because of what you did?
No, not really. No, I don't.
Why not?
Well, I just did what I was asked to do, and I did it to the best of my ability, but I didn't consider myself, or don't consider myself, a hero.
That's actually a very common answer.
I'm
It's
sure
actually
it
a very,
is.
very common
I'm
answer,
sure
whether
it
it's,
is.
you know, the guys who stormed the beaches of Normandy or
Right.
your fellow veterans from the 376. When did you finally get back to the States?
1st of September 44. I came back on a troop ship. We went through a hurricane on the way back, which was quite an experience in itself. That ship would go over, and I'd say, well, it'll never come back up this time. And then the mess hall, the tin trays would bang up against this wall. The next time they were up against the next other wall. That was quite an experience.
So you're going back and forth, 45 degrees,
Yeah,
and
right.
this and that.
That was a hairy experience, but I got back 1st September 44.
And did you train others, or did you separate altogether?
No. They sent me to Miami Beach for R&R for 30 days. Of course, I was in pretty good shape when I went there. But after 30 days, I needed R&R. But anyway, then I was transferred up to Georgia in a training unit. I trained replacement crews and B-24s. And I was the operations officer. I went out in the morning and made up a schedule, briefed the crews, went out and flew for 4 hours, came back and filled out the paperwork. And then finally went to B-29 transition, and I trained B-29 crews till the war was over.
In terms of these training, the training exercises, were there, can you make a comparison between when you were being trained and the quality of your fellow students, your fellow cadets, your fellow trainees, and your instructors? But then when you turned around and put on the other hat, what were the quality of the people you were training? Or what, I guess, compare the two experiences. I know there are different times and different roles, but.
Yeah, but the training was similar. I think maybe the one thing that was different, when I came back, the maintenance was horrible because all the experienced maintenance people were still overseas, and we had untrained maintenance people. We lost a lot of engines. And I had instructor navigators and bombardiers that didn't want to fly without an instructor pilot. And one of my most harrowing things, I had talked the instructor bombardier into flying with a crew that I thought was well qualified. And he sort of objected, but I had him fly. I was sitting out in my Jeep along the runway, watched them take off, and they pulled up the flaps instead of the gear and went into the pine trees, and I found that bombardier decapitated hanging in a tree, and I smelled burning bodies for weeks, and it was really a bad thing. So I think the instruction part, but the maintenance was so much different. It was really bad.
So you would have engines give out and other mechanical
You'd never come back
malfunctions.
with 4 engines working.
And then would there be problems with hydraulics and with other
yeah.
sort of wiring? And,
Yeah, there was all
and
kind
stuff.
of maintenance problems.
And then were these aircraft that you were flying, were they sort of refurbished B-24s that had been in combat, or were they just built, or were they new?
No, they weren't. The aircraft themselves were not in that bad a shape. It was just the training of the maintenance people was lacking, and the experience lacking. All the experienced people were still over there. Well, they were over there for a couple of years or so.
Well, right, the grounds crewmen, I mean,
They didn't rotate.
That's right. Unlike the flight crews, you get your 50 missions done,
Right.
or your equivalency thereof. You can cycle back in and cycle back home in 6 or 8 months, but there are flight crews in the 376 that spent 3.5 years.
One thing I did learn during my training, my instructors were pretty smart because we trained in Charleston, South Carolina. But if they'd find some excuse for the weather being bad, we went to Cuba. And San Antonio de los Banos, 28 miles from Havana, was a beautiful place. So when I trained my crews, when the weather was bad, we went to Cuba. So
When you were being trained, were you being trained by combat veterans?
no,
Was that too early to have the combat veterans?
Right.
Do you think that to what degree do you think you could have done a better job, or you could do a better job as a combat veteran yourself?
Oh yeah, I think so, because I've had some of my people that I trained write back and thank me for some of the things I taught them to deal with.
Well, you can't replace that kind of experience.
All right.
When did you separate from the Air Force altogether?
Well, 33 years later. No, I stayed I got out after World War II, but I stayed in the reserve. And of course, in the early reserve, we had some T6s and some twin Beaches that we just call up and say, hey, I want to go fly. Give me a T6, I want to go fly a couple hours, which was pretty nice. And of course, we didn't get paid or anything, but it still kept us a little bit into the flying. But then I was in a reserve unit and flying out of Cleveland Hopkins Airport, flying C-46s. In October 1950, the whole wing was activated. We sent our C-46s to Korea. We went to Donaldson, which is Greenville, South Carolina, and got brand new C-119s off the production line, checked out the whole wing. And during that time, I worked with the Army Field Forces Board on developing the heavy equipment drops and stuff. And then we checked out the whole wing and went to Germany. So I spent the Korean War and flying all over Europe, Africa, and the Middle East. And during the Vietnam War, I trained Vietnamese pilots in a C-119 gunship missions. And then I got out after 33 years.
And what rank did you reach?
Colonel. I served 2 years in a BG slot, but I had conflict with my civilians because I was a division engineering manager for the telephone company, and I was in reserve status. And my BG slot was at headquarters, 21st Air Force, and also here at the Pentagon and programs and resources. And it was interfering with my civilian job, so I retired as a colonel without getting my BG's promotion.
I'm sorry about that. Are there any other things you'd like to say, or if you want to talk a little more about the Corsican adventure, or is there anything? We have a few more minutes here, so I want to.
There's the Corsica adventure. There's the rest of the story, a Paul Harvey type thing. As our company had put some money into getting SeniorNet established, which is an internet thing for senior citizens. They had a World War II memory gallery, and they'd asked me to write something for it, which I wrote that Corsica mission. But there was a fellow in Tucson who was going through his late father's paperwork and found he'd mentioned a mission that date, a tough mission in landing in Corsica, and he dug through it and found out his father was my bombardier on that mission. And he dug through the records in the Pima Museum in Tucson and found the mission reports. His dad had some pictures of me on the wing of the airplane putting it back together, which I have. He sent me copies of it. So,
and what was the bombardier's name?
Toth, T-O-T-H. His son, I believe, is still an associate member of the unit here. So he came to Columbus, Ohio to see me, and he was even talking about going to Corsica. He really got into that. So.
Very good. Well, anything else to add?
No, I think we pretty well covered.
Well, I thank you for your time and your willingness to do this interview, sir.
Well, I think it's really great. I'm glad you did it. I think it's a wonderful thing because we're all going to be gone pretty soon. Those stories will, and there's a lot of them out there that should be captured. So
Yes,
it's a
sir.
great thing you're doing.
Well, thank you, sir. We appreciate it.